Check Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you as always from the Czech News World Headquarters here in Victoria. New Premier David Eby unveiled his new cabinet this week, and we are going to break that down in detail and dig into it with the Pod Squad. Joining us as always, Katy Merrifield, Jeff Ferrier, and Jillian Oliver. Thank you all for being here. We have a larger cabinet. I think it's 27 ministers and ministers of state, 9 new faces, a couple removals. One person bowed out of consideration at the last minute, Katrina Chen. So let's go around. What stands out to you as important here, starting with you, Jillian?
Well, there's a lot going on here. Maybe I'll just start by focusing on what I was looking for on the sort of climate environment side. We didn't get a lot of hints about this before now because we didn't have much of a leadership race. Eby only released his housing plan. So there's a lot here because in addition to the new ministers, we also got the mandate letters. So first, the climate ministry is split into two. One to deal with the mitigation side, which is, the measures that the province is taking to lower emissions and do its part to sort of stop climate change from worsening. And then the other side, which is the new ministry, is the adaptation side, which is to respond to the climate disasters that we're already experiencing. New minister Bowen Ma taking control of that ministry. And I think, it's an interesting approach. There's a lot of discussion in the climate world about how you could organize the response within government. I think, one way to look at it is now we have 2 ministries. There's going to be more attention on it. But I think there's also an argument that the response to climate change is already a bit fractured and siloed too much within government. And, I've heard lots of folks in that world talk about, maybe it would make more sense to either have a focus secretariat within the PO or within the finance ministry, because, the response to climate change, if we're going to take it seriously, really needs to be integrated into everything that we do. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out if the government's able to make more progress. We had the climate accountability report out a couple of weeks ago. Still not a whole lot of progress there. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think more interesting and promising is the shift at the energy ministry. We got a new minister, Josie Osborne, who has a good reputation amongst environmental folks. And all of her new mandate virtually is focused on the climate emergency. And for a lot of folks, I think that's been the missing piece of the puzzle to really focus how the government is addressing the energy file with an integrated climate lens. Some stuff missing, no mention of LNG or fracking within her mandate letter. The government's got some tests on some new projects, especially first Tilbury LNG decision coming up. So interesting to watch, but lots of promising stuff there on the environmental front.
Yeah, and also on the environmental front, I guess Bruce Ralston moving to forestry might have implications for the old growth and other policies on forestry as well. We'll have to watch that and see what it means. Katy, what jumps out at you?
Yeah, so in terms of things I'm not surprised over, wasn't surprised to see Lower Mainland dominance in cabinet, 4 from Vancouver and 12 from surrounding areas. Wasn't surprised to see Bowen Ma and Nikki Sharma elevated. I believe we all predicted that. Also wasn't surprised that Sheila Malcolmson was replaced by a stronger minister in Jennifer Whiteside. But what stood out to me is keeping Adrian Dix in health and Mitzi Dean in MCFD. Like it or not, that is kind of an overarching message of rewarding failure, given access to healthcare in British Columbia is abysmal, and Dean completely mishandled the autism file. However, on the Adrian Dix health front, I'm not entirely surprised because Eby's going to want to keep his trusted heavyweights in key portfolios. So that's why you saw, Far North, Kalon, and Dix addressing the key files in terms of public polling, at least, public safety, housing, and affordability and healthcare. So yeah, the biggest piece that struck out to me was keeping those two in their files. Although on the health front, again, I imagine governments typically don't like to capitulate to opposition's demands, so that could be a bit of a thumbing at them as well.
Mm-hmm. I think Eby seems to support the more recent moves from Dix. He's been at the press conferences with him on the, a change of funding and foreign trained credentials and that type of thing. So certainly he seems to believe that Dix is on the right track, even if we're not seeing the results, I guess, right now. Jeff, what jumps out at you?
Just to jump on the Dix part, I think he did a pretty good job in COVID, and I think he's done more in the last 3 weeks to attract and retain family doctors in British Columbia than Kevin Falcon ever did when he was Minister of Health. So I think David Eby's happy to put Dix's record up against Kevin Falcon's when he was Health Minister.
Got to make up for that time in 91 where you banned immigrant doctors, right?
Well, I think I thought we all were going to have family doctors by 2015. I think that's what Kevin Falcon promised.
Come on, you guys. We're talking about
fixing the problems now. Fixing the problem.
We fight about this last week.
Jillian, this is why we can never get anything done in the province of British Columbia. What stood out for me was I think Eby got the balance right. This is I described that for him. This is like balancing a Toyota Prius or a hovercraft on the Seattle Space Needle. There's so many considerations you have to take into account. And I think Eby's chosen his team, called the Eby Bunch, a mix of stability and experience, a injection of change and new, record number of women in cabinet, 17 out of 27. That's not half, that's more than half. And then strong rules, finance, Attorney General, energy, and a host of others. 7 people of color, so one of the most diverse cabinets ever. And I think you've got that mix of experience and new energy that's going to be really important to Eby at the one time projecting to the province. We're ready to get to work right away. There's going to be no learning on the job, but also this is my government. This is a new government. We're going to do things differently on key priorities, especially, and let's get going.
Mm-hmm. I thought, just personally, Whiteside going to mental health and addictions is a sign, and this was already mentioned, that may turn into a real ministry that has real budgets and powers and policies instead of the current Ministry of Air. That may be a priority ministry now, because I can't imagine someone like Jennifer Whiteside sitting there doing what Malcolmson did, which was just, like random things that didn't coalesce into other things. So that struck me. I think Whiteside is a big power player in this cabinet, and that's on the overdose crisis and other things. That's a big file there. Was there anything missing in this cabinet, or any concerns that jumped out at you? Katy, you've mentioned a few already, but let's go back to you. Is there something missing or anything you were looking for here that's not here?
I guess what I would want to focus on is, for those who love to, speculate about an early election, Rob, I would argue that this...
I like the sound of that Rob guy. I like the cut of that Rob guy's jib. I'll just put it that way.
So I would argue that this doesn't necessarily set that frame up, right? Like, no ministers from Richmond, no demotions from cabinet because folks aren't running again, aside from George Chow. Key ridings like Boundary Similkameen, Surrey, Cloverdale, Vernon, they weren't reflected in cabinet. Keeping Adrienne Dixon, Mitzi Dean in their files indicate there's a willingness to allow time for improvement. What I want to know, I'm very curious, is why is Melanie Mark still in cabinet? And why wasn't she included in the government's news release, only the OIC?
Right. Well, she's a minister without portfolio. I think they left her in because she has some personal health issues, but she wasn't sworn in at cabinet. That's right. So, you are correct. She is still in cabinet. I don't know an explanation for that, but is a question. Jillian, anything missing here or jump out at you that way?
Well, I already mentioned no specific mention of LNG or fracking in any of the environmental ministry mandate letters. And also, you mentioned the move to put Ralston in Forest, I don't think is super promising for folks that were hoping for faster, quicker action on old growth, although that is in his mandate letter. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch. I think, this does hit most of the right notes, but the NDP's problem has never been making promises. It's been on delivering them. So I think, like we've Eby's still fresh. We're still in the honeymoon phase. We're having our welcome cocktail in the hotel lobby still kind of era of the honeymoon. So we'll see. We'll see in the new year as these things get rolling. I agree with Katie. I don't think there's anything in here to suggest an early election. I think especially, putting someone transformative like Nikki Sharma in the AG role, it doesn't seem like Eby would be the type of leader to sort of just like pull that out from under all of these new ministers with the spring election. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see in the new year as this stuff gets rolling, how it's implemented, because there's a lot of new stuff in here to get moving on.
My understanding is Eby did ask everyone if they're running again, and they all said yes, because who's going to say no 2 years from an election at this point? Yes, boss, absolutely, boss, and everyone gets in cabinet. Jeff, anything missing here in your mind?
I'll just say that George Chow is the most honest person in caucus. I think we proved from the cabinet moves. The thing that was missing for me is, and it's sad and it bugs me, is Katrina Chen. Here's someone who was a really impressive member of the Legislative Assembly, very effective as a Minister of State, well liked and respected, advanced on a priority file, and has to step aside because of something that happens to too many women in politics and in society in general, and that's dealing with abuse. And so I'm sad that happened. I admire her courage. I'm super proud of the way that all parties rallied around her and shared support. And I think that shows some of the good that happens in the Legislative Assembly. I'd like to see coming out of this a little bit more than just, aspirational words about how we can make a better world, and a bit more government looking at what it can do to address these issues facing women, and in particular in its own bailiwick. One thing they could look at are non-disclosure agreements that are used throughout the public service in provinces across Canada and here in BC when dealing with issues of sexual harassment in the workplace. There's something that you could have folks report on so that we could actually see what's going on and give some power back to women who have it taken away, as we've seen this week. So
I think Chen would have been a big player in this cabinet. Yeah. She was co-chair of Eby's campaign. My concerns generally center around the new finance minister, Katrina Conroy, and Mitzi Dean, who we've talked about. I think they were the biggest surprises to me in cabinet. If we're being honest here, Conroy was not in most people's top 10 list for finance minister. She's got a low profile. She was forest minister. I remember during forest minister, she gives off the distinct impression she doesn't really like talking about her ministry, and she's very blunt, short answers. And I'm not sure how that matches up with the goal here of empathizing with urban Metro Vancouverites struggling with the cost of living and their budgets and affordability, when you have a cattle rancher from the Kootenays who doesn't show a lot of empathy in her very short comments, but David Eby sees something there. And then Mitzi Dean, Katie touched on this. I find that stupefying. That is a fundamental failure of an enormous initiative in a ministry, a year of defending it, angering everyone, burning all your bridges, and you're still in cabinet. I don't understand that. In the same position, and there's a discussion she's going to do more robust consultation. No one wants to talk to her. The bridges are burned. So those two really, I wasn't sure why Eby went that route. Does anyone want to jump in on Mitzi Dean or Katrina Conroy?
I think Katrina Conroy is in finance for a bunch of reasons. I think the biggest one is that she's going to be a steady hand in finance. She's the embodiment of steady hand, 17 years as an MLA, cabinet minister in two tough ministries, children and family development, and then forestry during old growth. And if you've got people who are equals for that role, and one of them is a cattle farmer or a rancher, you always choose the rancher. Because if you're looking for someone with a steady hand, there are things that ranchers have to do with their cattle that require the steadiest of hands. And that's who you want in finance, someone with that kind of skill and wherewithal, sure. I think.
And she's also, I believe, she's a former engineer. She's a business owner. She was a college instructor. No one's saying she's not qualified. I just wonder if she projects this sort of, we are in an affordability crisis where people's budgets are stretched by interest rates and inflation. The government has a lot of money to spend. It's going to need to empathize with people. And I'm not, that's the only point I'm raising there. Katie, what do you think, Mitzi Dean and Conroy? You've already touched on Dean. Give us your thought on Conroy. Yeah, I've already touched on Dean.
Well, I will say it's very, this is like regardless of partisan stripe, it is very strange to replace a finance minister so close to the budget. Typically finance premier's office and GCPE are pretty knee deep in prep by this time every year. And I think even Selena Robinson's staunchest critics would have to admit that she has done a reasonably admirable job stick handling the province's finances in addition to being a strong and empathetic communicator. You know, it's quite well known that there was significant tension between Robinson and Eby when he was housing minister. So, you know, I have to wonder, does this send a message that if you stand up to Eby, you're punished? But ultimately, look, like Conroy, like her reputation and her resume speaks for itself. I did wonder, you know, given there's a cabinet dominance in the Lower Mainland, where spending, the desire for spending is going to be significant, given the various needs on housing, public safety, and health. Like perhaps the premier wanted a longtime NDPer who I understand is quite respected in caucus, who, you know, sort of be the velvet glove on an iron fist to say no, to make those hard calls.
I think that's a great point. Jillian, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it probably comes down to caucus relationships. Eby's known for kind of being, you know, more of a lone wolf, and Conroy's, you know, the biggest thing that I've heard about her is how good her relationships are within caucus. And she's been negotiating the Columbia River Treaty up here. And I think, you know, having someone with those kinds of skills would be a big asset, given Eby's agenda. And also, you know, I live in the Kootenays. We have a very significant affordability crisis up here, a housing crisis, just like, you know, more urban areas of the province. So I think that, you know, she's got constituents that are going to have the same concerns and be in touch with those as well. So, you know, it's a surprising choice for sure, but I think that there's every reason to think that it's an informed one.
And her animal medical skills aside, having a woman from rural BC as the balance to the urban fella from the Lower Mainland is good. I come from a northern Ontario mining and forestry town, and there's something very, it gives you a really immediate perspective on life and what's important, because life can be tougher and the challenges can be more, you know, in your face and direct. And I think that's a perspective that, you know, given the NDP's difficulties in winning seats in the north and the interior, is an important one to have front and center, not just policy-wise, but politically for them as they move forward towards an election, perhaps in the spring. I'm just kidding. In October 2024.
They're all great points. I think you've rounded out the positives of Conroy and why that makes a lot of sense.
That's my job, Rob. That's my job.
That's right. I'm not going to belabor the point, but I do think as we hit a recession in 2023, all it would take is one short, chippy comment from the finance minister about tighten your belts or stop spending your money on Starbucks, and that file blows up so hard in the NDP's face that we'll be talking about it for weeks. So that is the only thing that comes to mind. Sometimes that blunt talk, critical talk, I don't think is going to work in finance at a time of a lot of fear and anger at interest rates and all sorts of things like that on the budget. So anyways, I've said my piece on that. Very quickly, can we just say some winners and losers here? We've only got a minute. Is there anyone we haven't touched on who went up or down or sideways that jumps out? I will toss out maybe Murray Rankin, who went from a triple threat to just Indigenous relations. We've mentioned Selena Robinson going from finance to future skills. I was surprised Eby did not assign her Minister of State for the Arctic based on where he was going with that. But any names jump out? Katie, really quickly?
As I've said, I was happy to see Bowen Ma elevated, and I think that's a good file for her. Nikki Sharma, that's historic, and was also expected. I go back to, I was curious on like Mike Starchuk, for example, Surrey Cloverdale. That's a vulnerable writing. He's not even a parliamentary secretary. And then as well, Vernon, Boundary Similkameen, those areas. That's what I was surprised about. Should we be headed towards a mythical spring election?
Jillian?
Last thing I thought was super interesting was Ravi Kahlon in the new housing ministry. I, was wondering before if that was going to be kind of like a ministry that Eby was really kind of running behind the scenes, or if it was going to be very empowered. And I think putting Kahlon, who is going to be potentially Eby's challenger within the leadership race, in that role shows that it's going to be a ministry that really does things and has, teeth to it. So I thought that was interesting, and, quite a robust mandate there. Will be interesting to see the progress that he makes.
I can tell you some people are wondering why Ravi Kahlon was not named finance minister and deputy premier. That is, I want, the question that is out there is whether David Eby is doing to Ravi Kahlon what John Horgan did to him, which is recognize the potential next leader of the party or someone who's a threat and give him a file where there's no win. You just keep pushing around as hard as you can major social issues, and then he's also not on some of the cabinet portfolios inside the cabinet that would give him file. Anyways, that is a rumble that is out there. Jeff, any ups or downs here
Sure.
we haven't touched on?
Under the radar winners we haven't talked about. Rachna Singh moving into a senior role in education. Friend of the show, Dan Coulter, Minister of State in Transportation and Infrastructure.
Much respect to Dan Coulter, friend of the show. Hey, Dan.
Bruce Ralston, because I said in the Vancouver Sun that he might be shuffled out of cabinet, and so he gets to rub that in my face for the next 2 years that he's in cabinet. The loser we haven't talked about is British Columbia's chief housing flipping officer, Mike Bernier, shuffled out of the housing critic portfolio in the BC Liberal shadow cabinet, now in forestry. Big loser. No one's talked about this.
We don't have... Okay.
That's not
we don't
really
have time.
Demotion. Go ahead.
It's a huge demotion.
Okay. All right. We're out of time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe. For all the latest, we'll be back with Political Capital next week.